Hi, everybody. It's Pastor Josh back with another lesson on our series on financial stewardship. So, we're glad that you're here. I'm glad that you're joining me today. I'm here in my home library, and we're going to continue in on part three, where we're dealing with debt and how to get out of debt, how to handle debt, how to stay out of debt. It's a major component when we talk about financial stewardship and financial responsibility and financial health is making sure that we're out of debt and that we're living below our means. And so we've looked at our financial stewardship lesson. The first two lessons were dealing more with biblical principles, and these are the principles of ownership, recognizing that God is the owner of all things, and that I am just a steward of what He has entrusted to me. We've also dealt with the attitude of contentment, being content with what the Lord has portioned out to you, that some of you, the Lord has portioned more, and others, the Lord has portioned out less, but we have to be content with what He provides. And then having an attitude of thanksgiving and making sure that we're thankful and that we're having an attitude where we're just grateful for what the Lord has provided. Because if we're honest, we really don't deserve anything from the Lord. So that's what we talked about in the first lesson. And then the second lesson, we talked about sinful spending and dealt with the how money can really become an idol, and how to really correct idolatrous spending and turn away from that, and to be a steward where we're handling finances in a way where we're glorifying God and not making His resources an idol. And so those are really the foundational parts of the class, and everything else is going to build on that. And because it is a financial stewardship type of study that we're doing, we want to make sure that we keep that in the forefront for us, but we can't avoid the nuts and bolts of finances, counting dollars and cents and purchases. And so today, as we look at dealing with debt, we're not going to be so much in the scriptures, but we're going to be dealing with, okay, how do we kind of get our lifestyle and spending under control? But that doesn't mean that we're forgetting about those biblical principles. We want to make sure that we keep those in mind. And in Proverbs 22, verse 7, we see a key truth that Scripture reminds us of, and that is the part of the danger of debt. And debt can get you in trouble. And Proverbs 22:7 says, "The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower becomes the lender's slave." And what that means is that if you are indebted to someone, you're accountable to them. And if you didn't have that indebtedness, you wouldn't have that obligation to them. And that obligation can really become burdensome. And that's why we want to avoid debt and get out from under debt. And that should be a goal for you. And maybe you have debt, or maybe you don't. And if you don't have debt, that's great. And I want to challenge you and encourage you to avoid debt. Do everything you can to avoid debt. Now, there's some things where you can't really avoid debt all the time. Say buying a home. That if you wait until you could afford to buy a decent basic home, you're going to be waiting and saving for a long time. And so sometimes it is acceptable to take on debt, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. So let me just kind of bring you through some of the dangers of debt. When we think about debt, you think about the danger of debt. We saw that first danger is that you're enslaved to the lender. We see that in Proverbs 22, verse 7. But another danger of debt is increased cost. And when you think about borrowing money, whenever you finance an item, it's always going to be more expensive because you're not only paying the price for that item, but you're paying the interest on top of it. And so there's always going to be an increased cost. And finance purchases, they just cost you more in the long run. And so it's better to save up and buy it outright than to finance it. You could save yourself a lot of money that way. Another danger of debt is increased monthly expenses. That if you buy things and you finance things, it allows you to buy more and more stuff, but that squeezes in on your monthly budget. And so by structuring debt in a way where maybe you could buy an item and you're paying it off over 2 or 3 years. You're able to buy more stuff than you could really afford, but that just puts more pressure into your monthly budget, and it just makes it harder on everyone. So you have the increased cost, and then you have the increased monthly expenses of things. A fourth danger is the potential for default. And default, if you don't know what that is if you can't pay your bills, then the stuff gets taken away and repossessed, or you take a hit on your credit, and so you default on that, and that could just set off a cascading effect of repossession and eventually bankruptcy. And so if you own your belongings outright and you haven't had them financed, you don't have to worry about any of those things. And so there is no potential for default or repossession. Let me give you a fifth one, and that's the potential for elevated stress and hardship. You know, the media and just the consumerism in our world, it makes you want to believe that if you buy these things and have these things, it's going to alleviate your stress. But really, the opposite is true. That if you buy things on credit and you don't own them and you're paying it off, that just creates more stress, more hardship. It gives you just an elevated sense of worry and shame. You have elevated hardship because you can't afford these things, but you got these bills coming at you all the time. And so you need to worry or you need to watch out for the potential of elevated stress and hardship. And then let's see here. Another one, I think it's number 6, is that debt creates shame, depression. That debt could really get you down, and it could really have a negative effect on you and your family. You just think about the divorce rate and how many couples divorce over money problems. And that's a huge problem. And so being out of debt and avoiding debt, it guards you from all of these potential problems. And these are things that if you have debt, you're going to deal with. Even if you have just a little bit of debt, and just from a few places, you have that pressure to deal with them. And so the pressures of debt, they keep you from living in a way that would really honor God. You know, I think a final warning is that that debt keeps you from showing hospitality, keeps you from giving. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, you know, we'd love to give more, or we'd love to give at all, but we have so much debt, and you know, if we, you know, we just can't keep up with it, and so we can't give to the Lord. And they've just taken their priorities and they flipped them around, and their belongings have become more important than the Lord. You know, giving to the Lord should be the first priority. And they find themselves in a position where they can't give, they can't show hospitality. Have missionaries come to town, and missionaries have a need, and it's like, man, we'd like to give, but you know, we can't. And so it just adds to greater pressures and hardship. So I just want you to understand the dangers of debt. Now, I think that there are circumstances where debt can be acceptable and where it can be a good thing, but you have to be really disciplined about that. And that's kind of more higher level type of stuff. And I think that's why so many of kind of the well-known financial counselors, they really talk badly about that, and they say no debt, not at all whatsoever, because it's really hard to contain that. And if you're just getting started and just trying to get out of debt, just dealing with any debt can really get you into hardship. And so the general rule is avoid debt as much as possible. And we'll go over some circumstances where debt may be a benefit to you. I don't think that all debt is sin, but I think if you go into debt and it's just for pleasure reasons, consumer type reasons, then that really reveals an idolatry that's within your heart, that you're willing to expose yourself to all these dangers in order to have this temporary gratification. But we'll get into that later on. So let's look at kind of our second main portion. We've looked at the dangers of debt, but what I want us to do is look at getting out of debt. Okay, let's say you're in debt, and I'm never surprised when I talk with people and they tell me how much debt they may have. Talk with people that are $90,000 in debt, and that's a huge number, and that's not even counting mortgage debt. If you include your house debt, that's even more. And you may be listening today and you don't have any debt, and like, good for you. That I want to encourage you to try to remain debt free. Some of you might have just small debt, maybe a couple $1,000s, and others might have more marginal debt, $10,000, $11,000. But that's still a lot. And so I want to talk about how to get out of debt. And getting out of debt is really important. And it takes two things. I think getting out of debt, it takes a key attitude, and an attitude of saying, I'm going to get out of debt. I'm going to live below my means. I'm going to put an end to my borrowing. Okay, that's an attitude. Okay, that's a commitment that you make between you and your spouse. And if you're not married, that's just between you and the Lord, saying, okay, I need to change my life. That my spending, my budget, it's out of control. And I can't go on like this. It's not good for me. It's not a good testimony to the Lord. It doesn't show self-control. And so I need to get out of debt. Okay, that's the starting point, because that's a key attitude. And this key attitude is saying, I need to make changes. Okay, but that key attitude won't get you out of debt. Okay, that's just the beginning portion of things. The second thing that you need to understand is action, key actions. Okay, and that action could involve cost cutting. It could involve restructuring debt. But you need to take action, because if you don't take action, then things are never going to change. You could have the attitude of, man, I need to get out of debt. I want to get out of debt. I'm going to get out of debt. But until you take steps, it's not going to happen. And so key attitudes and key actions, they need to come together. And then you're able to really get yourself out of debt. And so I think the first one to really understand key action is living below your means, and just having a commitment saying, I'm going to spend less than what I make. And so you may have just one source of income, you may have multiple sources of income, but combine those all together and say, this is what I'm making. And at the end of the month, I need to be spending less than what I make, and I need to have money left over that I could save. And we're going to be talking about that in later lessons when we get into the budget, and creating a budget that has built-in savings, having your giving to the Lord as a built-in component. But just a key action of saying, I'm going to live below my means. And I'm not going to spend everything that I have. I'm going to spend less. And if you're in debt, then you're probably not doing that. And so you need to start living below your means. And then the next step would be cost cutting, and saying, okay, if I'm not living below my means, what do I need to cut to get to the point where I am living below my means? And so this cost cutting is super important. And this is where it's painful, because it's not easy. And this is why so many people are in debt, because they don't want to experience the pain and the hardship of cutting back on the things that they want. There's more things than I have resources for, and the way to get that is debt, and that's how you get yourself in trouble. But to cut back and say, hey, listen, I'm going to prioritize the things that are necessities, and then those needs, and then cut out everything else, and then slowly reintroduce those things back in. So let's talk about paying off the debt. Let's say you have debt. Maybe you're a student and you have you're just kind of beginning to get into trouble. You have a credit card that you got, and you have a $2,000 limit, and you've already put $1,000 on that credit card bill. And if I ask you, hey, Do you have $1,000? How long would it take for you to come up with $1,000 while paying all of your monthly expenses, tuition, gas, insurance, your living expenses, all of those? It might take you several months to come up with $1,000. And so I want to just help you understand a couple of methods of how you could pay down debt. These methods work whether you owe a little bit or whether you owe a lot. You may be listening to this and you're $50,000, $60,000 in debt, and these will work for you as well. And so the first method is called the high interest method. And this one is the most mathematically sound method. And the way that this method works is you take all of your debts and you list them. This is who it's for, and this is how much I owe, and this is the interest rate. And so your debts may vary. You may have credit card bills, and you're paying 24, 25% in interest. Maybe you have a really good credit card, and they only charge you 19%. 19%, it's huge. And so you list your debts, and then you list the interest rate for each of them, and then you reorganize them by the highest interest rate debts first, going to the lowest interest rates, and then you start paying off the highest interest debt first. Okay, and that will save you the most amount of money. That's the most mathematically sound, but it's also maybe a little bit more difficult. That your higher interest rate debts may be your highest debts, and so it may seem like it's taking you longer to make progress. And that's why we have a second method. The second method is called the snowball method. And the snowball method is a method that Dave Ramsey has made popular. And the snowball method says you start small and then you get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the way it works is you take all your debt and you list it smallest amount at the top, and then the next largest and the next largest, and you work your way down until you get your largest debt. So let's say you have a bill from the doctor's office, copay, and that's $60. So that's a debt, and you could pay that off this month. Boom, and you've eliminated that debt, and it's off the books. And so maybe you have 10 creditors that you owe, and you've just paid off that one bill. Well, now you've just made a 10% difference in the number of creditors that you owe. And you think, wow, that feels good. Like I used to have 10, now I have 9. I'm making some progress here. And so now the next month you look, okay, who's next? And maybe it takes you a month or two to pay off a $200 debt that you have, maybe for Macy's or some other department store. And then you pay that off, and then your next debt might be a $500 debt, from some other place. It takes you a couple months, you pay that off, but as you pay off your debts, what you're able to do is the money that you would have paid to the first few creditors, now that money is available for you to pay off the remaining debtors. And so as you continue this, you go from smaller to larger, and you kind of gain momentum. And so you're eliminating debtors and those debts, and now you're able to contribute more to the remaining debts. And so the snowball method is really helpful because it gives people hope, and they say, hey, I'm making progress, I can do this. The key idea with the snowball method is that you are making minimum payments on all of your debts, and as you pay those off, then you take that what you were paying as your minimum payment, and you apply that to the next debt down. So that will help you. Dave Ramsey has a lot of good stuff on that. Dave Ramsey is a Christian financial counselor. I wish he did more on his radio program dealing with the biblical aspect of things. So many times he deals with just the dollars and cents, and really dealing with the dollars and cents and getting out of debt. That doesn't really help you unless you deal with the heart. And so if you're just joining us, I just want to urge you, after this lesson, you could go back and you could look at lessons 1 and 2, and it'll help you with those key attitudes. But Dave Ramsey is a good resource. You just make sure that you understand that he's dealing more with the dollars and cents component and not so much of the spiritual heart component and the Bible teaching. I wish he did more. And Dave, if you're listening, you can do more, buddy. So I want to encourage you in that. So the high interest method and the snowball method, those are both good methods, and you could do either one. If you're in a lot of debt and you're trying to get out and you're just barely keeping your head above the water, do the snowball method. That'll give you some progress. It'll give you a little bit more breathing room, and it'll really help you. And so just keep that in mind. Okay, key principle. And you guys really need to understand this. With getting out of debt, no matter if you use the high interest method or the snowball method, whether you're doing cost cutting or you're trying to live below your means. Okay, key principle. All right, it only works if you refuse to accumulate more debt. So you need to make sure that, hey, I'm not accumulating any more debt. That Macy's card or that JCPenney's card, no, I'm cutting it up. My credit cards, I'm cutting them up or I'm putting them away, and I'm just going to refuse to do any more. Because if you're trying to pay off debt and you're being successful in paying off debt, but you are accumulating more debt at the same time, that's just, you're just undoing what you've done before. It's like the little kid that gets out of the shower and he starts drying his feet and his legs first, and he's wondering why, he dries off, one leg and then dries off the other leg, and then the first leg is wet again. Well, because he's just fighting a losing battle. And so if you don't refuse to accumulate more debt, you're just going to continue on. Like you'll be paying off Peter, but you're borrowing from Paul, and it's just going to drive you crazy. And so, key attitude is you need to refuse and make it just an adamant determination. I'm not going to accumulate any more debt, no matter how small or no matter how large or no matter how great of a deal it is, no matter how small the interest rate it is. Don't accumulate any more debt. This is very hard if you've already gotten yourself in trouble, but this is imperative. I can't stress it enough. So if you don't refuse to accumulate more debt, things are never going to change. And so you have to have that determination. No more debt. This is why Dave Ramsey, when he talks about his baby steps, one of those baby steps, saying, hey, I want to get out of debt, is saying, okay, you need to save up $1,000 and have that as an emergency fund. That is there for emergencies, and that money is there so when an emergency arises, you don't have to borrow that money from somewhere else. You can borrow it from yourself, and then after that emergency, you pay it back. Okay, so that $1,000 isn't there for you to spend; it's there for you to save, and it's only there for emergencies. So let's say you're trying to get out of debt, you're working the snowball method, and you don't have the emergency fund in place, and you hit a big pothole on the road, and you have a tire blowout and it messes with your alignment, and so you need to buy a new tire and you need to get the car aligned, and that might be a couple $100, $300, $400, depending on the vehicle. But you don't have that money because you've just been paying off the debt, and now you're tempted. Well, where do I get that money from? That's why having the emergency fund and saying, hey, I'm gonna save up this money to begin to get out of debt, that will insulate you from the temptation of having to borrow money. So that's why Ramsey has this emergency fund in place. That's a good idea. Your emergency fund, if you're a student, it may not be that high. You might just need a $200-$300 emergency fund. Now, if you own your own business and you have employees, $1,000 isn't going to go far for an emergency fund. And so just depending on your financial needs and your monthly budget. But having that emergency fund will really protect you. I've got a couple friends that I've talked to that have shared with me that they had that situation, and they've had to go to a payday advanced loan place, and they could get the money quick and it's easy, but they're paying 23, 24, 25% in interest. Or maybe they take a gun, or they have a tool, a generator or something that they could take to the pawn shop and get a couple $100 and just kind of help them get them through a tough time. But in order to get that tool back, like, you have to redeem that, and that's where the interest comes from. So it's better to have an emergency fund where you could borrow from yourself, get you through the emergency, and then you pay it back and replenish it. So that will save you that interest. So we talked about getting out of debt, looked at that attitude of living below your means, and then the actions. You have to take action, you have to cut cost, and you have to refuse to accumulate more debt. And then only then will these methods of paying down the debt and getting out from under the debt work. So let's take a look at another key topic, and this is with kind of getting out of debt, and I want to talk about restructuring debt. And I may not be talking about what you think I'm going to talk about, but restructuring debt is a powerful tool that you could use that could really help save you some money. So when I talk about restructuring debt, that can mean a couple different things. A lot of times you hear on the radio, you could consolidate debt. Maybe you have 3 or 4 credit cards, and you have a debt that you owe for some other things. And what you do is you go to one main debtor, and they will pay off debt for you, and now you have one bill that you're paying on, and they'll charge you a little bit less interest than what you were paying for the others. And in theory, that works. It's maybe all of your debts might be $300-400 a month that you're paying off, and if you consolidate that debt into one, it may save you $50-60 a month. But that is kind of a mirage that if you stick to it and you're disciplined, yeah, it'll help you. But usually what happens, people consolidate the debt, and it just perpetuates a cycle of, I'm going to solve my financial problems by taking on more debt, and I'm going to restructure the interest rate. And then now they say, hey, we're only paying $340 a month instead of $400 a month on our bill. We have an extra $60. So what are we going to do with it? Well, let's spend it. And if you're not disciplined, then that's going to be a temptation for you. So that kind of restructuring the debt, that's not what I'm talking about. That can work if you're very disciplined, but most of the time, no. When I talk about restructuring debt, I'm talking about negotiating the debt down. And so for some types of debt, this will work. Other times, it won't. So if you go to your credit card company and say, hey, listen, I owe $3,000, $4,000. Can you give me a discount on that and cut that in half, and maybe just knock it down to $2,000? They'll laugh in your face. it just won't happen. And so credit card debt, they're not going to deal with you. But maybe you had an accident, and you broke your arm, or you broke your leg, or something happened to your child, and you have these medical bills, and it might be a $2,000 medical bill that the insurance covered most of it, and now you have this portion. Well, you could call the hospital, or go into the hospital or the doctor's office and ask for a discount, just saying, hey, listen, my insurance only paid this much, and is there any way that you could reduce this? A lot of times they will. Sometimes you have to fill out paperwork, and you have to show that you're in need, or you're below a certain income amount. You may need to do that, or sometimes you just need to ask, hey, could I have a discount? And they'll do it for you. And so that is just asking. You may get your debt reduced by 20, 30, 40, 50%, sometimes even more. So my wife ended up in the hospital last year with cancer, and by the time we had 3 emergency room visits, and we had a 2-week hospital stay. It was like an enormous medical bill, and we went in there and asked if they could do something to help us with the bill. They gave us paperwork, and we filled that out, and it turns out we were below a certain income threshold, and they cut the bill down like 65, 70%. And, it brought my wife and I to tears. But we got that discount just because we asked. So some of your debtors, you can just ask. And they will restructure your loan by either reducing the interest rate or just reducing what you are required to pay back. So some tips for that is, ask, do the paperwork. When you talk with people, try to work your way up the chain of command. When you get a call center person that you're talking on the phone, they're the first line, and they're trained to say no. They're trained to say, hey, no, this is the amount, and there's nothing we could do about it. And be pleasant with them, and be gracious with them. And after you talk with them, and they talk back, and then say, hey, listen, it's like, could I talk with the supervisor? This is like something that that I really want to get help with. And then they'll kick it up a level, and they may say yes or they may say no. And then if they say no, then you ask to go to the next level, and you'll be amazed by being kind, by being gracious, being forthright with them, and just asking. A lot of times they will work with you, and they may not reduce the debt amount, but you may say, hey, listen, working hard, I've been making these payments, and want to try to get out from under this. Is there a way where you could reduce the interest rate? And that is another way to restructure things. So these are the things that you can do to restructure debt, and you'll be amazed. Sometimes just by asking, they will reduce what you owe. We already talked about negotiating or renegotiating the interest rate. Already talked about consolidating debt into a lower interest rate, and this may work for you if you're disciplined, but a lot of times people restructure the debt, they consolidate it, and then it just perpetuates the cycle. So I want to encourage you away from that. It may work in theory, but it's not something to it's not the magic bullet that these companies kind of make it out to be. So let's talk about another aspect, and that is cutting loose some of the baggage. Sometimes you have debt, and you have a bad deal. You made a bad financial decision, and it's dragging you down. And what do I do now? It's like, if I stick with it, it's a bad decision. It was a bad decision the moment I got into this debt, and so what do I do now? So let me give you an example, and I wish I had I think we already threw it away, but we got a flyer in the mail from one of these rent-to-own companies, and they have appliances and televisions and home furnishing type of stuff, and it's all about you can make payments until you pay it off, and then you own it. So one of the things that we saw is a washer-dryer combo. You get a new washer-dryer, a nice new modern thing, and normally $12.99 or $15.99, but it's on sale for $12.99. It's only $25 a week, and so you see that flyer and you say, "Whoa, $25! I can handle that." Well, it's $25 a week, and how much is that per month? It's $100 a month, but that $25 figure that just stays in people's minds, and they say, "Hey, $25 a week." I could come up with $25 a week, and we got a nice new washer and dryer. And you read the fine print, and you see, well, how long is the term for? And that term is a 2-year term. And so you do the math on that, and you say, well, $100 a month for 2 years, that's $2,400. So I'm buying a $1,300 combo, and I'm paying $2,400 for it. And so this is a great deal for the company, because after 13 months of you making your payment, like, you've paid off that machine, and they've already got their profits built into that, but they have another 11 months of you paying $100 a month to make a profit. And so you're paying an extra $1,100, and when that is money that you could be saving. And so let's say you fell for this and you got into this, and you just did it maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and I got into this, and now I have almost 2 years of payments to go. Well, what do I do? Well, you could get out from under this and say, hey, listen, call the company and say, hey, listen, it's like, I can't afford this, it's too much, and you guys are going to have to take the machines back. And they will fight you on that. They will say, no, you don't want to do that. It's like, you want to default, and like, if you default, then it's going to be like a repossession, and it's going to affect your credit. Well, if you're trying to get out of debt anyway, and you're avoiding debt, then having a ding to your credit is not going to be a problem, because you're not going to be using your credit. Okay, remember, you've committed to that. And so they're going to say, no, listen, don't do that, and they'll try to negotiate with you and say, no, maybe we could lower the payment a little bit. Well, anyway, they want to keep you on as this paying customer, but you say, hey, listen, no, it's like, I can't afford it. Like, these machines, you guys are going to have to come and take them away. They take a ding to your credit. And so that's the whole purpose. You're allowed to stop paying on it, because you're saying, hey, listen, I made an agreement and saying, if I stop paying or if I can't pay, then you take the machines back. So they're not out of any money. They've made their deal, and you're saying, hey, I'm going to stop paying, you take the machines back. Well, what do? You need clean clothes. Well, this is where kind of restructuring your expenses and your purchases comes in. That you go on the computer to Craigslist, and you could look through page after page after page of used washers and dryers that will range between $75 and $150. And you could buy these machines on average for about $100. And so what do? You cut loose that debt for that rent-to-own company and say, hey, I'm going to take this month's bill or payment, and I'm going to buy a washing machine. And you buy it, and it's not going to be as nice. It's going to be used. It's going to be older, but it sits in your garage or your laundry room. It's not there to impress anybody, and it's there to wash your clothes. And so you buy that, you wash your clothes, and you hang them up to dry, and then you iron them out and do whatever you have to do. And then the next month, take $100 and you buy a good dryer, and now you have a good working washer dryer, and you've saved $100 a month for the next 2 years. That's $2,400 you save. Let's just say, even if you calculate it to, you save $1,500. You take that $1,500, and now you can apply that to debt. Now, that's what I talk about when I'm saying, restructuring your monthly finances and your budget. You could be afraid of taking action and say, no, that's too much of a hassle. It's like, I've already made the deal, and I'm just going to see it through to the end. Well, if you keep doing that, you're going to be over budget, and your finances are going to be tight, and nothing's going to change. And so you have to take action, and you could take reasonable and legitimate action. And for them to tell the people, hey, take the machine away. I'm not going to be able to make payments on this, and so take it back. That was the agreement. You're still honoring the Lord, and you're still honoring your commitments. That's why it was built in that way. But you can take this kind of painful action. It might be painful at the time, but when you're not paying that monthly cost every month, and that's really a benefit to you, and it feels good to save that money. So that's kind of a smaller example. Let's talk about a larger example of just cutting loose bad debt. And let's say you got yourself in trouble and you bought a new car. Let's say you bought a new car last year, so it's about a year old or so. And you're trying to get out of debt, pay things down. But as it is right now, let's say you're $200 over budget every month. So you've done up your budget, this is how much you spend, this is how much you need, and every month you're $200 over budget. And how are you able to sustain that? Well, because you're putting on your credit card and you're digging yourself deeper and deeper in the hole. So you have this car, it's a year old, and let's say you bought it for $30,000. It's a nice new car, and at this time, it's not worth $30,000. It's already depreciated more. Let's say it was a really nice used car that was returned on a lease, but let's say it's worth about $29,000, $28,000 at this point. So you owe $2,000 more than the car is worth. And so most people look at that and they say, whoa, it's like I'm already upside down on the car. What can I do? It's like I'm already in a bad situation. And so I guess I just got to ride it out. Well, maybe not. So for this vehicle, payments are about $550, $560 a month. And you've got 4 more years of payments. Okay, so we're talking about $550 for the next 4 years. That's a lot of money, and that's that's to pay off a car that isn't even worth as much as you owe on it. So you're upside down. So you're thinking, man, what do I do? Like, do I just ride it out, or do I take evasive action? Well, I'll tell you. Hey, it would be better for you to take evasive action and eat some humble pie and lose a little bit more on the front end of this deal than to see it all the way through and really lose out. So you're considering selling the car to get out from under the payments, but this is a big step. It'll be embarrassing, and it'll just be that the dealership is going to take advantage of you. But you say, hey, listen, I got to take action and I got to get out from under this debt. This car is like an anchor. I'm barely trying to tread water and keep my head above the surface. And I got this anchor weighing me down. I got to cut it loose. And so you cut it loose, you sell it, and the price that you get for it, it's not enough to pay off the loan. Maybe you have a remaining, $3,000-$4,000. That's okay. You've lost that money, but really you lost that money when you made the deal the first place, when you bought that car. But then you're in a predicament and you say, hey, listen, I need a car. I need to get to work and get the kids, drive them around. So what do we do? So here's what we go. Same principle that we talked about with the washer and dryer, buying a quality but cheap machine to get you by. That's the same principle that we're going to use here. So you sell your nice newer car, you get out from under it, and you buy a good used car, maybe 12, 13 years old, but you pay $6,000 for it. And it's got low mileage, and and it's in good mechanical order. You've taken it to your mechanic. So you end up negotiating it and you buy it for $6,000. You have to finance it because remember, you don't have $6,000 to go, but you have to do what you have to do. But you bought the car for $6,000 and you're financing it for 3 years. Well, this means your payment is now $177, right around there, $180. So you went from a payment of $550, $560 in your monthly budget with the newer car to you've gotten this older car. It's still, good, reliable, but it's kind of a humble mobile. And now you're only paying $177. So this means that you have a monthly savings of about $380, which is a difference between your old payment and now your new payment. You take that money and you're able to pay down debt. And remember, from the beginning of this, you were $200 over budget every month. Well, now, by cutting loose this bad debt and getting more acceptable debt, now you have about $160 where you are ahead of the game. And you could take that money that you're saving and you incorporate that into the snowball method. So, cutting loose bad debt that just is going to cost you, don't write it out. If you can get out of it, if you could sell it, if you can, return it, like do what you have to get out of it. Now, before you take a big step like this, I would encourage you to go to a trusted brother or sister in the Lord that is financially stable, that has demonstrated discipline in their finances, and say, hey, listen, I'm trying to, cut this anchor away and to do something new and to get out of this debt. And can you just kind of look over my plan and make sure that it's sensible and it's reasonable, that you don't want to be caught by surprise with something. But this is this type of situation where the principle works. So whether it's for a smaller item or a larger item like a car, cutting free from that bad debt is something that will really help you. In the case of the washer dryer combo, that will save you $100 a month in your budget, and it'll save you about $2,000 or $1,700, depending when in the process you've made that change. But it'll save you significantly. Or in the case of the car, you go from being $200 in debt every month over budget to about $180 under budget. So just that one decision will solve your monthly budget deficit. So I want to encourage you. You got to take action, and you have to sometimes do radical steps. Sometimes it's embarrassing. And, hey, listen, I'm 42 years old, and I drive every day. I drive either a motorcycle that is worth $1,200 or a Honda Civic that is almost 20 years old, and that thing's worth about $2,000. And I have a little pickup truck that is about $1,200 is what I could sell it for. That pickup truck, I never buy new tires for it because that would double the resale value. So I always buy used tires for that pickup truck. And, these cars that are 15, 20, 25 years old, they're still mechanically sound. And I think about how much money I've saved by having vehicles like this than going out and buying a car for $30,000 or even $20,000. So sometimes taking radical steps and saying, hey, listen, I need to get out from under this debt and to buy a good, reasonable, reliable car in the $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 that could really help you, and that could be that one big change that will help you for the rest of your life. So those are some examples of restructuring your debt and getting out of debt. Let's talk just briefly about acceptable debt. Sometimes it is acceptable to have debt. I just gave you the example of buying the car, the $6,000 car, and having it for a 3-year term, and you're paying $177 a month. Yeah, you are paying interest on that, but you're paying interest on a car that has already appreciated, or already depreciated. The interest is minimal. It's less than you were paying previously for your other car, and it gives you the breathing room in your budget where now you're under budget, and you have that extra $150 to pay down debt and to get yourself into more of a healthy situation. And so that would be a case where it would be reasonable, and it's, you're not going to drive, your horse and buggy to work, or you're not going to ride your skateboard to work unless you work nearby. So you need a car, and but to have a car that you can actually afford and that is going to be a benefit and a blessing to you. So sometimes that is acceptable debt. Generally, I tell people don't buy cars on finance. If you're going to buy a car, just buy it outright and save yourself the money. If you're really in need, then buy a car that you could really afford that is going to be beneficial, helpful to you. Well, let's talk about the best kind of acceptable debt, and that would be mortgage debt. And mortgage debt is a kind of debt where buying a home, buying something that is going to be an appreciating asset. Appreciating means that it's going to be worth more over time. So houses are appreciating assets. They go through the cycles of up and down. But you look at the average house price in 1980 and the average price it is now. It's gone up. It has that track in a positive direction. And mortgage debt it has benefits with it. But usually mortgage debt is it's acceptable because no one's going to be able to save enough to buy a decent family house. That if you have an average income and you have average expenses, then you're going to have an average savings. And by the time you save up enough to buy a modest house that might be in today's market, $200,000, $250,000 for a small house, or like an average house. I think today's market is about $330,000 in our area in California. There's no way that you're going to be able to save up that much money and to buy a house outright. So mortgage debt is acceptable. I'll give you an example. When Nicole and I bought our home, we were living in a one-bedroom apartment. When we got married, we were determined that we would live debt-free, and we were determined that we would live just on my income. Nicole worked a full-time job as a medical biller, and our determination was, we're just going to save whatever she earns. We're going to give to the Lord from that, and then we're going to save so that way we could buy a house someday. And so that worked out good, that we were just living on one income, and we had one income that we were able to save. So that was a real blessing. But in order to make that happen, we had to live in a very cheap one-bedroom apartment in a not so good part of town. But when we bought our house, we were paying less for a house in our mortgage than we were paying in rent for a one-bedroom house or for a one-bedroom apartment. And so it's having mortgage debt. If you buy at a good price, at a good time in the market, and with a good interest rate, it's going to be a benefit for you. Now, if someone was going to buy at this point in our market, I would say, hold off. We've had 10 or 11 years of growth and just steadily increasing house prices, and it can't continue. And so, work hard, save, and these things always come in cycles. And so we're right here, and just be patient, and it's going to drop down here. And so if you buy right here, it may continue to go down, but eventually the trend is going to be back up. And so you buy at a deal. So mortgage debt and buying at the right time is acceptable debt. Also, income generating debt. That some of you might have your business and you know what this is. Let's say a man is a truck driver, and he buys a truck and he has to finance it, and his payments are this much, but that truck allows him to do his work, and so he has this debt, but that debt allows him to have a machine that produces money, and the income far outweighs the expense, and so it is acceptable. You may have a small business where you need to buy some item, and this item is going to save maybe 30, 40, 50 man hours per week, and you're able to your income from that is going to exceed your expenses. Yeah, that's the sort of thing that it's acceptable, but you have to worry, or not worry, you have to be aware that taking on acceptable debt, you could get over leveraged, and you could get greedy, and you could get in trouble. So you got to watch out for that. So let's just kind of wrap this up. Just a couple final thoughts. Avoid debt as a general rule. Only purchase necessities and live below your means to pay off debt and get out from under debt. Um, uh, Debt that is going to be a benefit, that is going to produce income for you, that's acceptable, but you got to be careful with that as well. Another key rule: never finance entertainment. So vacations or going to restaurants or buying gifts at Christmas time. I can remember a good friend of mine in high school was telling me he's bragging about how his parents would go into debt every Christmas. And they would go into debt thousands of dollars to buy gifts for him and his siblings. And I can remember as a high schooler, just thinking that's dumb. Because I know that after a couple months, what has happened to those gifts? You're not using them anyway, or they've broken, or you've worn them out. And so, never, never, ever, ever, ever finance entertainment type of items, vacations, restaurants, gifts, toys, those sorts of things. Um, you know, uh, Getting out of debt, really tightening the belt, and taking action and being proactive and taking action. That's important. It's never too late, and so begin taking action. I can remember vividly as a high schooler, I was probably a freshman in high school, and we had a big recession, and people were losing their jobs, and people were losing their homes. And I remember watching this on the news, and one day my dad came home. He called a family meeting after dinner time, and he said, "Hey, listen, taking a family meeting here, and we're going through a recession, and we need to tighten our belt. And so things are going to change around here, and it's not changes that we want to do, but these are necessary changes. And so we're going to pray. We're going to trust the Lord to provide. We're going to cut back in entertainment items. We're going to cut back on everything that is non-essential. We're going to take fewer trips in town." That time we lived maybe about 20 miles from the nearest supermarket, and so going into town, we lived out in the country. They'd just take a trip into town once a week that wasn't related to their work, and so just cutting back on all of these things. I remember my dad saying, "Hey, listen, we're gonna be eating a lot of rice and beans," and he was serious. And I remember for that year, we ate a lot of rice and beans, and just didn't have just more of those kind of fun, enjoyable items. There's just so many things. We were back to the basics. And as a high school student, I kind of understood it, but I didn't like it. But I look back now, and I see, that he was being proactive, and he was being wise. And he sat down with the family and said, "We're going to pray, and we're going to trust the Lord, but we're going to take action as well." And that's what I want to encourage you to, is if you're in debt, and you're over budget, and you know that you need to correct things, now's the time to say, "Hey, listen, I need to get this area of my life right. I want it to be pleasing to the Lord. I want the way I handle finances to be a blessing to my family, and I'm going to make changes." And so I want to encourage you to make those changes. So living within your means, that means just controlling your spending and having an attitude towards spending, and knowing the difference between wants and desires and needs. Practicing self-control, taking action, and just being wise and saying, "Hey, we need to get out from under this debt." So I want to leave you with one last thing. This is kind of a spending philosophy, and this spending philosophy says, "Hey, listen, I want to prioritize my spending along these lines. I want to first give to the Lord. I want to save and give to the Lord proportionally as He prospers us. I want to prioritize saving and creating that emergency fund, and creating a significant and helpful savings. And then I want you to prioritize needs and be able to articulate, is this a need or a want? And making sure that your needs, what you say are needs, are genuinely needs. And then emphasizing purchasing value rather than something that's new. There's a difference between value and price, and you could get great value buying something that's used, like the washing machine or the car, or you could buy new and pay more, and you don't have anything to show for it. So purchasing value rather than purchasing once. Emphasize purchasing appreciating assets and avoiding depreciating assets. And then avoiding luxury items and avoiding debt. So that kind of spending philosophy, we're going to talk about that a little bit more next week, and then going to talk about some budget type of stuff. So hopefully this is helpful for you, and hopefully keep that attitude where you recognize that God's the owner of all things, and that you have an attitude of contentment and thanksgiving, and guard yourself from idolatrous type spending. So thanks for being here. I'm glad that we could go through this study together. Looking forward to next week. God bless. Bye-bye.